Kalen Dre poured the wine with a calm that didn't belong in that room. The bottle tilted slowly in his hand, ruby liquid sliding into crystal glasses with a soft, accusing sound. The fire in the stone hearth crackled once, sharp, almost nervous, as if even it sensed what was coming. Outside the cabin windows, the forest stood frozen beneath fresh snow, the trees black and skeletal against the white, watching. Across the table, Marceline Ardent smiled too quickly. It was the kind of smile that arrived a fraction of a second late, like an actor missing their cue. Her fingers tightened around her napkin, twisting linen into a thin rope. She didn't look at Kalen. She didn't look at the woman seated beside her either. That woman, Silvara Dune, laughed softly at something she'd just said, completely unaware. She was relaxed, open, her shoulder brushed Marceline, as if it meant nothing at all, as if they hadn't memorized each other's bodies in stolen hours and borrowed lies, as if this dinner was a knife balanced on its edge. Kalen set the bottle down. The sound was gentle, final. He lifted his glass, eyes steady, voice even, almost warm. "I thought," he said, "since honesty has been such a guest in our lives lately, it deserved a seat at the table tonight." The air shifted. Forks paused midair, glasses trembled. The fire popped again, louder this time. Silvara's smile faltered, not from guilt, but confusion. Marceline's breath caught. Kalen looked from his wife to her lover and smiled. And in that suspended second, every secret they'd hidden, every late night, every lie whispered into pillows they didn't share, rose up, ready to be dragged into the light. If you were sitting at that table, whose side would you be on, and what would you hope he says next? Leave a comment, because the answer matters more than you think. 3 weeks earlier, the cabin had still felt like a sanctuary. Kalen Dre stood on the back deck, breath fogging in the early winter air, staring out over Lake Aurelian as dawn bruised the sky in shades of steel and ash. The water was perfectly still, a mirror so smooth it looked unreal, like a promise that nothing beneath the surface could ever move. He wrapped his fingers around a mug of coffee that had already gone cold. Behind him, the cabin creaked softly as it always did in the morning, timber settling, old beams remembering weight. This place had been in his family for generations, passed down not through money, but through silence. Men who didn't talk much, women who endured, winters that demanded honesty from anyone foolish enough to lie to themselves. Kalen used to believe that if anything in his life was unbreakable, it was here. And her. Marceline emerged quietly, barefoot, wrapped in one of his sweaters. The sleeves swallowed her hands. Her hair, dark, carefully uncareful, fell loose down her back. She leaned against the doorframe, watching him the way she always had, as if he were a story she'd already read but still loved. "You're up early," she said. He turned, smiling automatically, couldn't sleep. She stepped onto the deck, the wood cold beneath her feet. When she slipped her arms around his waist from behind, the gesture felt right. Familiar, but something in it, some infinitesimal thing, didn't settle the way it used to. Her cheek rested between his shoulder blades. For a moment, Kalen allowed himself to pretend. Pretend that the faint floral scent on her sweater wasn't unfamiliar. Pretend that her phone hadn't buzzed at 2:17 a.m. the night before, and again at 2:19. Pretend that he hadn't seen the name flash briefly on the screen before she rolled over and silenced it. Yes, just a letter, just enough to plant a question. "Next weekend," Marceline said lightly, "we should invite someone up, make it less quiet." The word landed oddly. Kalen nodded slowly, anyone in mind. She hesitated. It was barely a pause, a blink, but he felt it like a hairline fracture in glass. "Maybe Silvara," she said. "From the gallery, you met her once." Yes, he had. Silvara Dune. All sharp intelligence and soft laughter. A woman who looked people in the eyes when she spoke, as if daring them to lie back. Kalen took a sip of cold coffee and swallowed. "Sure," he said, "why not?" Marceline smiled, relief washing over her features so fast she didn't realize she'd shown it. And that was the moment Kalen knew. Not the full truth, not yet, but enough. Enough to understand that whatever had entered his marriage wasn't an accident. It wasn't confusion, it was choice. As Marceline went back inside, humming softly, Kalen stayed where he was, staring at the lake. Beneath its flawless surface, he imagined currents pulling in opposite directions, silent, powerful, inevitable. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't ask questions he already knew the answers to. Instead, he began to plan. Because some betrayals don't deserve explosions. They deserve witnesses. And if you've ever suspected the truth before you could prove it, would you want confirmation or control over how it's revealed? Tell me below. Your instinct says more about you than you realize. The cabin had always been honest. It was built that way, stone and timber fitted without ornament, designed to endure winters that punished weakness. Kalen had grown up believing that places absorbed the truths spoken inside them, that walls remembered laughter and silence alike. If that was true, then the cabin already knew what Marceline refused to say out loud. She stood at the kitchen sink that afternoon, rinsing mugs that were already clean. Outside, the wind carried the smell of pine and snow. Inside, the radio hummed low, classical, something wordless and safe. Marceline liked safe. She always had. Not because she lacked courage, but because she'd spent most of her life trying to outrun chaos. A childhood shaped by unpredictability, parents who loved loudly and destructively, had taught her early that stability wasn't boring, it was survival. Kalen had been stability. When they met, he didn't overwhelm her, he didn't demand, he listened, he made space. He felt like a shoreline after years of drifting water. That was why the guilt hurt so much. She dried her hands, reached for her phone, and stopped herself. "Don't." The word echoed sharply in her mind. Silvara Dune was a mistake she couldn't untangle without pulling everything else apart. They met at the gallery where Marceline curated exhibitions, late evenings, shared critiques, conversations that wandered into territory Marceline hadn't visited in years. Silvara asked questions that weren't polite. She noticed silences and didn't rush to fill them. The attraction hadn't been immediate. That was the lie Marceline told herself. It had been gradual, dangerous in its subtlety, a slow erosion of boundaries disguised as connection. And now Silvara was coming to the cabin. Marceline pressed her palms flat against the counter, breathing through the familiar ache of fear. If Kalen knew. No, he couldn't. Across town, Silvara Dune closed her studio door and leaned against it, heart racing for entirely different reasons. She wasn't reckless by nature, she was deliberate, careful, a woman who believed clarity was a form of kindness. Which made the situation unbearable. She loved Marceline. Not the idea of her, not the stolen moments. The woman herself, her precision, her restraint, the way her eyes softened when she talked about art like it was something alive. But Silvara also knew what she was. the other woman, and she hated that version of herself. When Marceline invited her to the cabin, with Kaelin present, Silvara nearly refused. It felt wrong, it felt dangerous, it felt like a test no one would survive. But a quieter voice inside her whispered, "Maybe this is how it ends. Either with truth or with consequences." Meanwhile, Kaelin Dre was already 3 steps ahead. He sat alone in his study, documents spread across the desk, not legal papers, not accusations, observations. Dates, times, patterns. He hadn't hired anyone, he didn't need to. Marceline had grown careless, not because she didn't care, but because guilt exhausts vigilance. And beneath the pain, beneath the slow burn of betrayal, something colder had taken shape in Kaelin. Resolve. If you were in his place, would you confront the truth the moment you felt it, or wait until you could control the outcome? Leave your answer, it matters. The invitation went out on a Wednesday. Simple, casual, perfectly reasonable. Dinner at the cabin this weekend, would love your company. Kaelin wrote it himself. Marceline watched him send it, her chest tight but her face composed. She told herself she was imagining the tension in his shoulders, the stillness in his movements. Silvara responded an hour later. "Thank you, I'll be there." The drive up was quiet. Snow lined the roads in pale, watchful drifts. Pines arched overhead like cathedral beams. Marceline stared out the window, replaying memories she couldn't rewrite. Silvara arrived just before sunset. She stepped out of her car, scarf trailing, eyes lifting to take in the cabin. When she turned toward Kaelin, their gazes met, and something passed between them. Not suspicion. Recognition. Kaelin knew her now. Not as a name. Not as a concept. But as the woman who had stepped into his marriage. Still he smiled, warm, polite, disarming. "Welcome," he said, "we're glad you could make it." And Silvara realized, too late, that she had underestimated him. The first twist had already happened. Dinner preparation became choreography. Marceline moved between stove and table. Silvara offered help. Kaelin poured wine. Every gesture was careful, every word measured. They talked about art, about weather, about nothing that mattered. And yet, everything did. Silvara noticed how Kaelin watched, not accusingly, but attentively, as if he were studying a painting for flaws invisible to others. Marceline felt the walls closing in. Kaelin felt calm. Because the truth, once accepted, had given him clarity. And clarity is dangerous. As they sat at the table, candlelight flickering, Kaelin lifted his glass. "To honesty," he said softly. The words landed like a warning bell. And somewhere deep in the cabin's old bones, the storm began to stir. Kaelin waited until dessert. Not because he enjoyed prolonging their discomfort, but because timing mattered. Truth delivered too early looked like anger. Truth delivered too late looked like weakness. This moment was neither. The plates were cleared. The fire burned lower, settling into a steady glow. Outside, snow had begun to fall again, soft and deliberate, layering silence upon silence. Marceline sat rigid in her chair, her spine too straight, her hands folded in her lap as if she were bracing for impact. Silvara leaned back slightly, glass of wine untouched now, her instincts screaming that something was wrong, but not yet knowing what. Kaelan stood. "I'll grab the last bottle," he said lightly. When he returned, he didn't sit. He poured the wine slowly, methodically, the sound of liquid against glass unnaturally loud. Then he placed the bottle down and looked at them both. "I've been thinking," he said, "about how fragile stories are." Marceline's breath caught. Silvara frowned, uncertain. "We tell ourselves versions of things," Kaelan continued, "versions that make us feel justified, safe, even kind." He lifted his glass but didn't drink. "And sometimes," he added, eyes locking on Marceline, "we convince ourselves that as long as no one names the truth, it doesn't exist." Silence thickened. Silvara shifted. "Kaelan." He raised a hand gently, not angry, controlled. "I invited you here," he said, turning to Silvara now, "because I wanted to meet you properly." Marceline's heart began to race. Silvara straightened. "We've met." "Yes," Kaelan said, "but not like this." He took a breath, one deliberate inhale. Then, "Marceline," he said, "how long have you been in love with Silvara?" The question fell into the room like a dropped plate. It didn't shatter. It echoed. Marceline's face drained of color. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Silvara froze. Kaelan didn't look away. The truth had arrived, but not as accusation. As invitation. To speak. To own. To stop pretending. If you were sitting at that table, would you answer honestly or deny everything to save yourself? Pause here, decide, then keep listening. Marceline stood so abruptly, her chair scraped across the floor. "I never meant," she began, voice breaking. "I didn't plan this. I didn't want it to happen." Silvara rose too, her face pale. "Kaelan, I didn't." "I know," Kaelan said quietly. "That stopped them both." "I know how this started," he continued, "and I know how it continued." He reached into his pocket and set Marceline's phone on the table. And looked. The screen lit up with messages neither woman could deny. Not explicit. Not crude. Worse. Tender, familiar, real. Marceline covered her mouth. Silvara closed her eyes. The fire popped sharply, sending sparks up the chimney. "This," Kaelan said, voice finally cracking, "is what you took from me." The room broke open then. Marceline sank back into her chair, sobbing now, not delicately, not quietly. The controlled woman she'd always been dissolved under the weight of consequence. "I was lonely," she whispered, "and I hated myself for it. I thought I could fix it before it mattered." Silvara stepped back, shaking. "I told myself you were already gone," she said to Kaelan, "that I wasn't stealing anything." Kaelan nodded once. "And I told myself," he said, "that if I stayed calm, this wouldn't hurt." He laughed softly, bitterly. "It does." That night ended without resolution. Silvara packed and left before dawn, her tires cutting through snow like an apology that came too late. Marceline locked herself in the bedroom, grief pressing in from all sides. And Kaelan sat alone by the fire until morning. This was the moment everything seemed lost. Marriage, trust, the future they'd imagined. And yet this wasn't the end. It was the bottom. Morning arrived pale and quiet. Kalen stood at the window again, same place as weeks before, but he was not the same man. The door behind him opened. Marceline stepped into the room, eyes red, face bare of defenses. "I won't ask you to forgive me," she said. "I don't deserve that." He turned slowly. "But I will tell you the truth," she continued. "All of it, no protection, no excuses." She spoke for a long time. About fear. About craving to be seen. About choosing wrong and knowing it. When she finished, Kalen exhaled. "I don't know if I can stay," he said honestly, "but I know I won't live with lies." They sat together in silence. Later that day, Kalen called Silvara. Not to blame her. To close the door properly. And in that act, measured, painful, deliberate, something shifted. Because healing doesn't begin with forgiveness. It begins with truth that stays spoken. If you've ever reached the edge of something broken, would you walk away or stay long enough to see what could be rebuilt? Leave your answer, the ending depends on it. The storm arrived without warning. By nightfall, the wind howled through the pines like something alive, rattling the windows and shaking loose snow from the roof in heavy thuds. The cabin glowed against the dark forest, a solitary pulse of light surrounded by vast, watching blackness. Kalen hadn't planned for this. Not the weather, not the timing, and certainly not what Marceline would ask of him. They stood on opposite sides of the living room now, the fire rebuilt and burning high. The distance between them felt wider than the room itself. "I don't want us to pretend," Marceline said, her voice steady despite the tremor beneath it, "and I don't want you to stay out of guilt or habit." Kalen nodded slowly. "Good." She swallowed. "But I need to know before you decide whether there's anything left worth saving." That was the moment. Not the dinner. Not the exposure. Not even the betrayal. This was the confrontation that mattered. Kalen stepped closer, not aggressively, not cautiously, just honestly. "What I lost," he said, "wasn't just trust. It was certainty. I thought I knew the rules of my own life." Marceline didn't interrupt. She had learned, finally, how to listen without defending. "I won't compete with what you felt for her," Kalen continued, "but I will tell you this, love doesn't survive avoidance, it survives truth, repeatedly, brutally, even when it costs something." He looked at her fully then. "And if we rebuild, it won't look like before." Tears slid down Marceline's face. "I don't want before." Silence pressed in. The fire cracked sharply, sparks leaping upward like punctuation. Kalen exhaled, long and slow. "Then here is my choice," he said. He reached for the drawer beside the hearth and pulled out a folded envelope. Inside were the papers he'd prepared weeks ago, not divorce filings, but separation terms, safeguards, boundaries. "I planned for an ending," he admitted, "because I needed control over something." He placed the envelope on the table. "But tonight I'm choosing a pause instead." Marceline stared at him, breath hitching. "A real one," he added. "Therapy, time, accountability, no half measures." She nodded immediately. "Yes, all of it." And just like that, the storm outside continued, but the one inside finally broke. Not with forgiveness, with commitment to truth. "If you were Kalen, Would you have chosen the pause or the final ending? Be honest, your answer says everything. Spring came late that year. The snow retreated reluctantly, revealing moss-darkened stones and thawed earth beneath the cabin. The lake shifted from steel gray to deep blue, rippling again with movement and life. Kalen returned alone first. He fixed the loose step on the deck, replaced a warped board by the window, let the silence speak without rushing to fill it. Marceline came weeks later. Not with expectations, with humility. They didn't fall back into each other. They rebuilt, slowly, deliberately. Therapy sessions were uncomfortable, conversations were harder, but something unexpected happened in the aftermath of devastation. They became honest. Not curated. Not careful. Honest. Silvara Dune did not disappear from the story, but she no longer defined it. Kalen met her once more in daylight in public. No anger, no accusations, just closure. I don't hate you, he told her, but I won't carry you forward. Silvara nodded, tears in her eyes. That's fair. She left town soon after, not in shame but with clarity, and that mattered. Months passed. One evening, as the sun dipped low and turned the lake gold, Marceline joined Kalen on the deck. They sat side by side, hands not touching, but close enough to choose it. I don't expect forgiveness, she said quietly. Kalen smiled faintly. I don't give it like a gift, I build it. She nodded, accepting that truth. Later, much later, they would find laughter again, trust slowly earned, love reshaped but real. Not because betrayal disappeared, but because it was faced. And the cabin, old, honest, enduring, held the story without judgment. As it always had. Final reflection. If this story made you uncomfortable, good. If it made you angry, sit with that. If it made you hopeful, hold on to it. Would you want the truth, even if it cost you everything you thought was safe? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Stories like this live longer when people talk about them. And if you stayed until the end, you already know this wasn't just about betrayal. It was about what survives it.